Hey everyone, welcome back to Treehouse. This is the Treehouse live stream for this week. My name is Dan Gorgone. I'm one of the teachers here, and I want to introduce a special guest of ours. This is Eric Erickson from Pearson Online Learning Services. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
Today.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we've asked Eric to come and talk about Google Analytics today. And Google Analytics is one of the topics that we talk about in a number of other courses that we have, especially SEO. It's a platform, a tool that is extremely important for designers and developers and website managers of all kinds to have an idea on how to use. There are so many details. There's so much information that you can get from this platform. But real quickly, what is Google Analytics and how can our students benefit from getting themselves and their websites set up in it?
So Google Analytics is a free tool. It provides all kinds of answers to questions you might have about websites that you build or manage. So there's anything from usability information to search engine referral information, social media information, all kinds of data you can glean from there about how your website's doing, how people are using your website, how they find it, and it can identify areas of opportunity for you. It's a really powerful tool, but it's also simple. Mm-hmm. So it's the kind of thing that, because it's free and it's fairly simple to install, it's worth putting on any website, really. It's an extremely popular web analytics tool. It's, if not the most popular, almost the most popular web analytics used around the world. And as a result of being so easy to install, it has information in a modular format, so it's easy for a beginner to jump into, while also having a deep tool set for someone once they reach the level where they want to get more advanced information.
Mm-hmm. And today we want to talk about a number of the important sections of data, of analysis that you can do, from the demographics and acquisition to engagement and conversions, which is how a lot of the data is set up now. But you mentioned how easy it is to set up, and that's really as easy as dropping some code into your website, right?
Exactly. Yep. It's a few lines of code, and you just drop it into the source code of every page on your site, and from there it starts collecting data within 24 to 48 hours.
Mm-hmm. And like we said, there's so much data that can be collected. So what we're hoping to do today is hit some of the highlights here, hit some of the really important metrics that you can identify, that you can collect data on. And by going through a number of these and some of the categories, you should be able to figure out what are going to be important to you, because it's going to vary. Not every website should focus on the same metrics. I mean, you really have to focus in on the specific goals of your website, your company, maybe it's your own website. So you do have to figure out what's important to you, but I think by the end of this, we should have a good idea of where to start, right? And so. Let's start. So let's talk demographics. Immediately we can figure out what type of users are visiting your site.
Absolutely. So let's go into a view I have for a particular website. This website, fun fact, was the first online kite store in the UK.
Nice.
Kiteshop.co.uk. Unfortunately, it is no longer with us. It's no longer on the web. But there's a treasure trove of data in there, so let's dive right into it. And as you can see, I'm in the Google Analytics interface. I'm on the Home tab, and we'll get into these other tabs later on. But this is where it lists out your different sites. And I think one thing worth mentioning is how it's broken down here. There are 3 levels to Google Analytics. There's your account level, which you can think of as a company or organization. And beneath the account level, there's then what are called properties, and properties are most easily thought of as websites. Basically, most properties are going to be a website. We'll talk about a little more advanced usage of properties later on. But for the most part, every website is going to map one-to-one to a property. Beneath properties, you then have what are called views. And views are profiles of your website information. The most common way you're going to use that is have a single profile for your entire website, and it's going to house all the information you need, and then you're going to dive into that view to get all of the different types of reports you want to get. So let's go into the Kite Shop account, and the property is kiteshop.co.uk because that was the URL, and then the view is just kiteshop.co.uk. And I'm going to filter back to the heady days of the summer of 2010, for our example.
And if you're looking at a flat graph of activity like this, obviously you're looking at zero activity, which you already said the website's offline, but it could also be indicative of the fact that maybe you didn't install your code correctly.
Absolutely. So if you install your Google Analytics code and a couple days later you come in and you still see this flat line, there's certainly something wrong with the install.
But usually they give you an indicator saying that they're receiving data and they get a little green check mark and everything.
They do. So there is a place in the administrative interface. So the other tab up here, so we went from the Home tab into the Reporting tab automatically when we're in the reports. There's also the Admin tab, which we'll get into a little bit more later, but there are places in here you can go that show you whether it's receiving data or not. So you can definitely double check things in there. And as you can see from this interface, it kind of dumps you into this audience overview, and something you're going to see commonly in the Google Analytics interface is a trend line with a date range. So let's go ahead and set our date range to June 1st of 2010 through end of August 2010. And you can simply type in your date range. You can use this interactive calendar widget to go ahead and drill down for simplicity's sake, so I don't have to go back 4 years. I'm typing it in. Now we have some data. And you can see from the trend line here that what it's defaulted to is the day view. So every single point here is a day, and you can mouse over any of these. Everything is pretty interactive in GA, so anything you can mouse over, you can generally click or at least glean more information from. So as you see, I'm moving the cursor. I can see for Friday, July 9th, 2010, we had 504 sessions. Now I think one thing that's important to clarify right up front here is Google recently changed their verbiage. The nomenclature for visits has been changed to sessions. So sessions and visits are synonymous. Other web analytics software will still use visits most commonly. But a session is important to understand that any time you visit a website, you're creating a session. So if I visit the website from my laptop here in the morning, and then I visit it from my mobile phone in the evening, that is going to be two separate sessions. So it's a slice of time in viewing a website. The other thing to note are users. So the difference between a session and a user are the unique. So the users basically deduplicates those multiple sessions from the same person. So sessions is a raw number of visits. Users are the actual unique visitors to the site for that given time period. And we'll get into some of these other metrics later on. So in answering your question, what type of users are coming to your site? This audience tab, there are 8 main modules or areas within Google Analytics. We're going to focus on these bottom 4 because that's where the core of the data lies. The top 4 are more your custom reports and interfaces. Once you're up and running and you know what you want to monitor, you'll be in these a lot. But audience acquisition, behavior, and conversions are where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time, certainly on the front end, and if not, on a regular basis. So within audience, this is where we get kind of demographic information, like Dan said. So we're in the Overview tab, and the first thing that you see that Google surfaces, and all of these modules have an Overview tab. So the easiest way to kind of get yourself ingrained with Google Analytics or get comfortable with it is to click around in these different tabs and just look at the overviews because it'll surface the most commonly used information. Google's big on user testing. They see that this is the information people like to look at a lot, so you're pretty safe going the Overview tabs to start out with. One of the things they surface here is this nifty pie chart that says new visitor and returning visitor. So we can see right away at a glance that the vast majority of users during this time period were new. That can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing. Throughout this presentation and anytime you're using Google Analytics, it's important to keep in mind that there's not necessarily this is the right way to be. It shouldn't be always 50-50 new versus returning. It really depends on your site and what the goals are, and it depends on the type of marketing you're doing. If you're doing any active marketing, either online or offline. So there's no, it has to be this way, or the best way is for it to be a set percentage. So for the summer of 2010, this time period, we can see we got new visitors. And as you'll see later on, that's primarily a function of the fact that we were doing some online advertising campaigns at that time. So we were trying to get new visitors. So this to us kind of confirmed, okay, our marketing in general is doing its job of attracting new visitors to the website. And we still have our returning contingent as well. The other thing you can look at in here under audience is geographical information. So let's look at location. Google Analytics location module gives you a nice evil genius view of the whole world, and you can see where your visits are coming from broken down by country, city, continent, or subcontinent. So we can easily switch between any of these. So we can see, because this was a kite store in the UK, most visits are going to be here. So in fact, if we go to continent, you'll see Europe is got the most activity, and we mouse over, it tells us how many sessions or visits we had in that area. And like I was saying before, anything you can drill down into. So let's say, let's drill down. Northern Europe looks like where the bulk of the users were. We can drill down into Northern Europe. We get a zoomed in map view of the different regions, and we get our table beneath. So most interfaces in Google Analytics will give you some sort of visual overlay, either that trend line or a map, or whatever's appropriate for that particular view, but most will give you a table beneath it to break down some information. Don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information in this table, because as we go through this, you'll start to understand why it's broken out between acquisition, behavior, and conversions. That's kind of the order of analysis for most websites. So let's just focus on the sessions for now, looking at the United Kingdom being the biggest area. Let's drill down into the United Kingdom. And it gives us by country, so we can break down by England, Scotland, Wales, etc. But actually what was more important to us that summer was figuring out what cities were generating the most traffic. So you can see here a lot came from London, the majority, but then decent amounts from Manchester and Birmingham. What this became was kind of like a hit list. Why aren't we having more visits from these areas? Certainly they're less populous than London, but that doesn't mean we can't attract more visitors through advertising.
Yeah, and these are great insights that you can get from all the different data that comes in. It's not only the opportunities, but the new opportunities from the unexpected visitors from places that you didn't anticipate before, and it can lead to all new markets, perhaps new campaigns, or new areas, new platforms, social media platforms to reach out to. So I believe the audience tab also includes information on browsers and mobile devices and things like that.
Yeah, it does.
Not sure we would have it for this site per se, but
well, back in 2010, so the iPhone had been out for 3 years. Android phones have been out for a couple of years. So we do have a breakdown between mobile and desktop. So when you click on mobile and the overview, it breaks it down by mobile and desktop. Now, another thing to note about the interface in Google Analytics, you have this table, but the tables are always accompanied by these buttons and in the upper right corner, and it just switches the view of the same information. So we can quickly switch to a pie chart, and when it's something like two things like this, it's very easy. So you can see that mobile was not huge. Now, the reason for this is because we did not have a mobile-friendly site at the time.
Right.
So that's a function of us not designing for what the users wanted. We were a bit lagging in mobile design at the time.
But you can imagine other sites now, other businesses now, looking at information like this, and if it was data that was similar to this, you could see trends over time.
Yeah.
If you look at it and you have all this data, and if you've been collecting data all this time, you can look at that trend line, not just over days, but over years.
Exactly.
And you can see the mobile audience, and that will give you more ideas on what to develop. If there are enough mobile users, maybe then you put your resources into a mobile optimized site, or you into a redesign that takes advantage of mobile.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. And you can note anything on this timeline. So if I click on, let's say, on Monday, the 5th of July, the day after our Independence Day, we launched our mobile site. I can click that day, and the dot stays there, and I can click this expansion arrow and create an annotation. So it says create new annotation, and I can put a note in here that says on that date we launched the mobile version of the site. So then anytime we refer back, we can measure from that point forward. So you don't have to store everything in a separate spreadsheet or note file, especially like you're saying, when you're going back years, you lose track of that. So that's another handy feature is to note, and I highly recommend anytime you make significant updates to your site, you note them in the timeline.
So in terms of figuring out where your audience is coming from, it's you can figure out their physical location, but you can also find out what sites they're coming from.
Yes.
And the referrals, as well as social sites and even the campaigns that you run.
Exactly. So after the audience tab in the interface, the next tab is acquisition. And that's where all of that information is housed. So we'll go to the overview tab. or rather, we're going to go to the all traffic tab in acquisition because it actually is a little more user friendly. All traffic, what this breaks down is we still have sessions here. We still see the same trend line as visits that we saw in audience. What's changed is down here in the table, we have it broken down by source and medium. So for instance, this first one is Google/CPC. Well, that's a shorthand for paid search, so Google AdWords. So that's the campaign that was driving a lot of those new visits. So we were spending a lot in AdWords at the time, and that's why it's the #1 source of traffic. After that's Google organic visitors, and then you have direct. None or direct are the same. If you either go to the site directly or if a user has it bookmarked, they're going to show up as direct. After that, you have other search engines, other sites, and you can expand any of these tables. By default, it'll give you 10. You can show thousands of rows, or you can page through them 10 at a time. The information's all here in a way that's flexible for you to kind of, once you're comfortable looking at it, to set it up in a way that makes sense to you. So oftentimes I will expand this to 25 to see what the top 25 referring sites are. But this all traffic sources is a great way to get a real high-level overview of what's going on. In fact, an even better higher-level overview, at the top here you see it says primary dimension. Instead of source and medium at the same time, let's just choose medium. There's only 6 rows in medium, and that's because now it no longer matters which engine it came from. We have paid search, organic search, none or direct. Referral, so referral is referring sites, other web properties that users are coming from. Not set is a common one you're going to see, unfortunately, in your analytics. Here it only has 3, so that means our analytics is probably set up pretty well. There are settings that affect, especially in the newest version of Google Analytics, what gets classified as not set. That's kind of the bucket for when you have a visit and Google doesn't actually know where it came from. And that can happen for a number of reasons. It's usually web server related. But if you're not set as real high, that can be indicative of a setup problem in your Google Analytics. And then email. So email can be a medium through which people get to your site, and so we count that separately, and it is separated out in Google Analytics.
And so we can assume that you were not doing email newsletters or email marketing at that point, but like if someone opens the email in their browser, that it's not going to count as direct traffic, but it will count as email traffic? It will get picked up like that?
It can. It depends. It depends on the email provider. So oftentimes what will happen is if you open it in your actual email client, it will display as email. However, if someone is viewing the email in their browser through that link that's commonly on the top of emails that says click here to view this in a browser, it will show up as the referrer. So if it's Yahoo Mail, you might see ymail.com as the referrer, and you have to know to kind of group that in with the email.
Right.
So that comes through just some trial and error and seeing where your traffic comes from. Not all email providers are like that, but you have to be aware of that so you can catch it. The other thing I think that's important to point out in this acquisition area that relates to that question, though, is campaigns. Because you can tag any link that you create. So if you have an email marketing campaign, you can add code to the end of every link in your email that specifically tells Google, classify this as email. So that's a way that you can control that so that going forward it's clean like that. So that no matter what, no matter how they get to it through the browser, through their email client, they're still getting classified as email. It's also the way you want to track any of your online display, etc. But when we're in the campaign tabs here, the campaign module here, the first tab or dimension is campaign, and that's campaign name. And this doesn't mean a whole lot unless you set up the campaign. What's more interesting is when you go into medium or source. So as you can see, as you guessed, we were not running email marketing at the time. So email would show up as a separate row here if we had been running email marketing, and it would have a lot more visits. As you pointed out, we were just running paid search, so CPC shows up here.
And so was the Kite Shop doing any social campaigns, or were they getting any social traffic?
We were. So if you go to a little bit further down the acquisition, there is a social section. And if we go to either the overview, and you'll see these sort of educational messages, the first time you use Google Analytics, until you dismiss them, they'll be there. I think they're good just to keep on because some of these interfaces are still pretty new, and it helps to have something to refer to. But as you can see in the Overview tab, it shows you which network and what traffic they came from. And this, as you pointed out earlier, can show you areas where you're getting traffic that you might not have even realized. For us, StumbleUpon was one that, not this summer, but later on would come to send us a lot of traffic, and we had completely ignored. So that was a surprise, and since it was second to Facebook, which consistently sends the most social traffic to the site, it was an opportunity for us to say, what can we do on StumbleUpon to capitalize on that popularity? Unfortunately, StumbleUpon may not be as popular as it was in 2010, but there are other networks that are going to show up in here that you may not have been aware of. This little icon here, this little sort of connected dots, is an indication from Google that they are sharing data. So there's deeper analytics available when they come from Delicious. There are other networks that Google has partnerships with, but they don't have partnerships, unfortunately, with Twitter or Facebook to share data. So it's still important to maintain visibility if you are doing Facebook campaigns through their platform and their analytics tools. Unfortunately, you can't replace everything with Google Analytics until everybody gets along and shares data.
That is when it becomes a little complex when you are running campaigns on other platforms. They are going to have their own analytics packages as well, and it may vary depending on what kind of membership, what kind of account that you have. So to be able to keep both sources, or keep all sources really of data intact, so that you can reconcile things at the end and you can really know what was effective and what are you wasting your time on or money on. But we talked a lot about where people are coming from, the sites and physical locations. But another great insight that Google Analytics can provide is what these users do once they get to your site. So in terms of behavior, what can Google Analytics tell us?
So absolutely, and behavior is the word to use. So the next module underneath acquisition is just that, behavior. And that encapsulates all of the content on your site and what users are actually doing with it when they're on your site. So this is where this trend line changes when you're in the behavior module. It goes from sessions into page views, because now we're talking about the content. We're talking about what's actually on your site. So it makes sense that the view changes a little bit. And as you can see here, we no longer have sessions and some of the other metrics. We have some other ones, though. We have average time on page, which is pretty self-explanatory. It takes the overall average of any time spent on any of your pages on your site. So ours was 40 seconds. Now, again, that could be great, depending on your site. That could be actually a significant amount of time. It doesn't seem like much, but 40 seconds, if you think about it, when most users aren't reading every word on every page, they're just kind of skimming, 40 seconds is a decent amount of time. And this website was designed for quick checkout, meaning we wanted product pages to be as short and sweet as possible with all the information right above the fold. And so 40 seconds to us was not a concern. And we did some user testing to confirm that. So that's another thing I'd like to point out, that this data is great and it makes you feel very powerful to have it, but it's not the end-all be-all. There's still the human element, and things like user testing, they're not made obsolete by this. In fact, this is only more enhanced. You're going to find things in Google Analytics that will confuse you. And sometimes the only way you can figure that out is by doing other forms of testing.
Right. And listening to your customers and your users as well, because there are plenty of you out there who are going to manage websites for companies where you have lots of customers or clients that are going to be getting in touch with you saying that they're having problems or just talking to you about your website. So when you add those anecdotes, and that qualitative data to the quantitative data, qualitative and quantitative, all this, once you put it all together, you do get a much bigger picture of your site and really how it's working.
Absolutely, and there was no way I could say with any confidence that 40 seconds per page was okay until we had done that user testing.
Right.
So until we heard from our actual users, we didn't know whether we should be happy about that or not.
So I know that Google Analytics can show you some of the common paths that users take.
Exactly. So they have what they call behavior flow now. They used to call that visitors flow. But it's essentially the same report, but it's entirely different than the rest of the interface. Because what it does is it shows you in order by column where people originally landed on, what page or pages they landed on your website, and where they go after that. So
I can definitely see getting lost on this page.
This
is a completely new interface, but it is really interesting to look at this.
One way to simplify this and make this a lot easier, I feel, is to change where it says landing page and go into your acquisition list. This is where you can choose what you want to look, how you want to look at this, and choose medium. So this will break it down into a step further. So we're actually outside of where they landed, and we're looking at where they came from. So we have our paid search campaign here, organic traffic, and our referral traffic. So I think that makes it a little more clear. What even simplifies it further is if you pick one of these like organic, you can click on any one of these boxes and choose highlight traffic through here, and it'll kind of dim everything else. So now I can just focus on what happened to organic traffic. Xcart is our product listing, our main product listing page. So most people were dropping into that. But if you go down just below that, the next most popular was Power Kites and then Stunt Kites. So of utmost interest to us were these Power Kites and Stunt Kite users because they represent a higher average order value, because these kites are hundreds of dollars, 50 to 100, to several $100s. So we then can click highlight traffic through here and continue our journey and look at, okay, where do they go after this? Well, what's interesting is most people who would come to the site and land on Stunt Kites would then look at the Power Kites. So clearly there's a user base there that's interested in both. And that's even more interesting to us because these are our whales. These are our big customers.
And if they're coming to you through organic traffic too, I mean, that's nothing but profit, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to pay for the organic stuff.
Exactly. So analyzing this, just starting to look through it, I know it seems like a mess of spaghetti at first, but just kind of clicking around, taking a look, if you don't let yourself be intimidated and you let yourself just start looking at it, you will immediately start noticing things about your site and how it's used that will probably surprise you.
So you can see where a lot of the people go and some of the paths that they take. But if you have Google search on your site as well, you can also see exactly what they're typing in for search terms, right?
You can. Unfortunately, Google has restricted the organic search terms for people that are signed into Google, and most users now are typically signed into a Google property when they're doing a search. So we get some idea of the keywords they type in, but not nearly the complete picture. Right. Where you get the complete picture is with the paid search.
Okay.
So, and they've now restricted that to be available within the AdWords interface. So to your point earlier, if you're running campaigns with other providers, AdWords, while it's owned by Google, is still technically a different interface and has its own reporting, and that's where you'll get the keyword information from there. So unfortunately, what was one of the most common uses for Google Analytics is no longer available, which is getting deep-level keyword information to find out what people were typing to get there. So you have to rely on other rank tracking software and paid search tools to figure that out.
Gotcha.
But I think another more basic sort of health indicator of your site is what the entry and exit rate is, or bounce and exit rate rather. So this column here shows bounce rate. Bounce rate is the percentage of users that come to your site and leave without visiting any further pages than that first one. And so our average is 26, which isn't bad. There's really, again, no rule about what's good or bad. I mean, the lower the better with bounce rate. However, you may have a site that has extremely information-rich pages, and it may make sense for most users to be able to get all the information they need from that single page and leave. And that's fine, especially if you're an informational site. But for a lot of sites, they monitor bounce rate just to check the health. The exit rate is different in that it's just the percent of users that leave the site from that page. What this can do, if you sort, any of these columns are sortable just by clicking. So we can sort by what has the worst exit rate. Now these have very few visits, but if you look at the default view and just kind of eyeball, let's see here, there we go. Just eyeball what has high visits and high exit rate, you can oftentimes identify areas of your site that need some help. There's got to be a reason why this one's 33% more than all these others. And in this case, it's the product overview page. And so what we used that for was optimizing that page to figure out what products to feature. So we felt like if we got this to go down, we had hit the right mix of products on that main product page, because it's hard to serve a page up to multiple audiences. Maybe you're into Stunt Kites, but I'm into Power Kites. Well, how many Power Kites do we put on there versus Stunt Kites versus regular kites? So we had to play around with that, a lot of trial and error, but we use this exit rate metric for this page as our indicator of either success or failure.
So you can also track analytics on landing pages
Correct.
as well, right? So I wonder if the bounce rate on landing pages would just be naturally higher because they're more, they're coming from ads or they're coming from paid sources or
It's true. For paid sources especially.
Yes.
So for paid sources especially, campaigns are doing, you're going to see a higher bounce rate in general on your landing pages. For organic sources and email, it depends on what you're doing. It depends on what the message in the email was.
Right.
And one of, a whole other focus in online marketing, people specialize in conversion optimization, and part of that process is retaining people on those pages for as long as possible to get them to do something, go to another page, fill out a form, make a purchase, etc.
There's a lot of elements that have to align
Right.
between the message that brought them there, the content that they see there, the calls to action, and then eventually, do they have enough confidence in what they see on these landing pages to take that next step?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So message alignment is a big part of that, or messaging alignment rather. The other thing you can look at here too is site search in terms of the actual words used inside of your site. So for the internal site search. So this is a good indicator of things users feel like are too hard to find on their own through the navigation. So if you go into site search in the overview here, it tells you all kinds of metrics, how many searches there were, percentage of people that do site searches, how long they stay on the site after they do a site search. But the thing that you probably want to scroll down to initially is to check the actual terms used. So Dragon, there was a line of Dragon kites that were very popular, and we were not surfacing them on the front page. And so when we came in here and we saw that, well, this is by far the most popular site search, we need to put that on the homepage, make the users do less work to find what they're looking for. But this is a great way to get some indication of qualitative data, like you were saying. So most of the things in analytics are quantitative. This is an example of something that's a little more qualitative, where users are getting direct feedback from the users on what it is they want to see.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like just a list of pure opportunity. When you're looking at, when you have information on what people are actually typing in and what they're searching for, these are the things that you can surface to the homepage.
Exactly.
You can add more products. You can give it more visibility. It can even dictate where you go with future products or services that you offer. So it could also help with confusion sometimes that users have about naming conventions maybe that
Yes.
you have on websites where perhaps you were trying to be clever and you named it something or you use the product or service name which has like a very specific meaning to that one thing, but users are coming looking for the more general term.
Right.
So that could be something else that users might be searching for, and this is something that perhaps can show up on this list.
Absolutely. Invaluable.
In terms of the engagement metrics and page views and visits and stuff, I mean, there's been a lot of people online that have said, there are plenty of metrics that are just they're not important. It doesn't matter how many views I get or how many clicks I get, or it doesn't really matter because what really matters in the end is, are you making money? Are you converting people?
Right.
And when we talk conversions, we talk about it a lot in our marketing courses and SEO as well. You're trying to get the user to do something. You're trying to compel them to take some action that hopefully benefits them, but at the same time benefits you. So the obvious example would be to sell them a kite.
Yep.
But it could also be to have them sign up for a newsletter.
Yep.
If you guys decided, looking at your stats, you're not getting a lot of email traffic, maybe you would do a newsletter. So you might say, well, let's give that a shot. And now we have a new type of conversion, which is to get them to sign up for that. But conversions are something that can be tracked in Google Analytics as well.
You're right. And as you said, there's different types of conversions. So filling out a lead form, signing for a newsletter, those are conversions. But so is checking out. Let's look at the most obvious example, I think, for the Kite Store, which is those actual sales. And all of these are housed under the conversions module, and they're broken down by goals and e-commerce. Those are essentially the two areas here. Goals are those flexible things we spoke about, like form fill-outs. E-commerce is strictly sales of products online. So if we look at e-commerce, we get conversion rate as the trend line, and you can change any of these. You can just get the actual revenue, so you can look at your revenue per day. You can do it per week, and so we have the conversion rate of the overall site. So of people that come to the site, what percent actually purchase? It was just under 3% at that time. Again, that could be good, that could be bad, depends on your business. One way to do that, any of these trend lines have the ability where you select the date to do a comparison period. So you can compare to a previous period, the equal number of days just prior to this period, or the previous year, which is probably more commonly used. And now on top of the blue trend line from that particular year, you have the previous year, orange, and you can see right away at a glance how well you were trending compared to the previous year, and your metrics are calculated for you, so you can see what percentage things are up or down. So our conversion rate improved, yet the actual number of transactions and revenue went down. Well, why was that? Well, average order value went down. So people, while they were buying more, they were spending less per order, and there were less actual products purchased under the quantity. So that is one quick way on any of these charts to get context of whether this is going well, better, or worse.
Let me ask you this. If you have a product that you're selling online, whether it's a bunch of different kites or you have one specific thing, how is it that you connect the action of someone going through the process of adding it to the cart and checking out and actually purchasing it to it registering in Google Analytics?
So that is where a little bit more complexity comes into your Google Analytics installation. So for any of these e-commerce transactions, you do need to do a little bit of custom JavaScript programming. So it does require a little bit of coding inside the e-commerce platform. Some e-commerce platforms now have GA enabled. So your CMS may have something as simple as a switch, where you flip a switch and you put in your account ID for Google Analytics, and it makes the connection. But a lot of the time, you still have to go in and tweak things. So it does help to have a working knowledge of JavaScript or access to someone who does.
Right.
So you have to actually feed this data at the time of purchase into Google Analytics. So it's more complicated than just tracking general usage of your site.
But in terms of the non-e-commerce goals, like signing up for a newsletter, or even it could just be checking out a page, right? Clicking on a page.
Yep.
Those are under goals?
Yeah, so under goals, you can set a page as your conversion. So the thank you page, for instance, or the page where you get the receipt after your purchase, you can set that as the goal. And it will count here the number of times that goal was completed and the conversion rate. You can also see from goals, which is nice, the goal abandonment rate of people who start. In goals, you set funnels. You can say, well, to reach this checkout page, you had to go through these 3 pages first.
Right.
And so that ties into this abandonment rate to tell you what percentage of people that start the checkout process or the form fill out but don't finish. So this 51% is probably much higher than we would like. So slightly over half the people that would start the checkout process would not finish. And that goes back to a page we saw earlier that had a high exit rate that was part of the checkout process. So this is where getting in here and looking at each one of these areas is important, because I wouldn't have known that context had I not gone through this exercise. If I just went into goals and I saw abandonment rate, I might light my hair on fire and say, I give up, I can't fix this. But that's where investigating, poking around, finding out, well, what pages have high exit rates that are in the checkout process? Oh, well, look at that. It's this page, and it's 3 times higher than any other page. That identifies opportunities for improvement immediately.
And that brings up a really important question that I can imagine the answer is going to be different for everyone, but how often should you be checking your Google Analytics?
Yeah, as with most of these things, yes, I think it's going to be different. But I would say a bare minimum for anyone managing sites and looking at your own websites, I would check in on Google Analytics weekly. I would do that for 2 reasons. One, the goal is to make sure data is still coming in. The worst thing you can do is go a month or 2 without checking your GA just to see how it's going, because you might come in here and this trend line might have stopped collecting data. There's all kinds of things that can go on with website updates, web server updates that can break your Google Analytics from time to time, or updates even Google makes. So they're very good about warning you about those things, and they're very rare, but the reality is things happen all the time that can break your Google Analytics data collection. You can also see things here that go crazy. You can see your traffic double one day, and that may be for a realistic reason that you really got double the traffic. It might be a configuration issue. that didn't surface before. So I would check in weekly for one reason alone, just to make sure the data integrity is solid. Secondly, I would figure out probably a handful or less, 3 to 5 metrics that are important to you or the websites you're managing. Like you're saying, like, well, how much am I making? Where are people coming from? And how long are they spending? Might be an example of something that's really important for you to check on a weekly basis just to maintain visibility into the health of your site. Because again, if something changes significantly, for better or worse, you want to know why. And if it's worse, you want to fix it. If it's changing for the better, you want to figure out how to capitalize on that.
Right.
So you don't want to miss an opportunity. And in these days, if you blow up on Twitter or some sort of social media network, you need to know that pretty quickly so you can jump in on it. You may already know if you're active on Twitter, but you wouldn't necessarily know what the impact was on your site. So it's really important, I think, to do it on a weekly basis, I would say. You certainly wouldn't want to go in here every day and go through every single view. You'd probably want to kill yourself after a while. Information overload, analysis paralysis, but certainly a high-level overview on a weekly basis. However, there are tools that let you keep on top of this stuff that make it much easier. So if we jump out of the standard modules here and we go up into this first one called Dashboard, you start out with a default one called My Dashboard. And what this is a series of widgets. It's like a Tableau, and they're drag and drop. You can X out the ones you see here that you don't like. But the point is, it's a play space for you to put those perhaps handful of metrics that you check in on a weekly basis. So the default one has all kinds of information, some of which I would say is useful for most users, some of which I would say you'd probably want to customize. So I think it might be beneficial to walk through creating one of these dashboards for yourself with just a couple different widgets on it.
Sure.
So I'm going to create a dashboard. I'm going to start with a blank canvas, and I'm just going to call it medium-based analysis. So everything in this dashboard is going to be built around where users are coming from. Organic, paid, natural, etc. So you can choose here, after you name it, the type of information you get. What I want to know is, for this first one, I think would make sense for a pie chart. And again, you're not going to necessarily know this until you play around with it for a while. But I want to know by medium. So I go down here and I select dimension, and I selected medium. You can search in any of these boxes. That's handy. I recommend, after a while, once you get used to the names, instead of having to scroll through this massive list, typing it in. And then the metric you want to know. So I want to know visits by medium. Sorry, sessions. They're now sessions. And click Save, and boom. Here is a nice, user-friendly way I can almost instantaneously, within a matter of seconds or certainly a minute, figure out where traffic's coming from, and I can check this on a regular basis. And there's all kinds, when you click Add Widget, all kinds of other things. You can do geographic maps like we saw. You can just do raw tables of information, etc.
This seems especially nice for when the stakeholders or the managers or the bosses are saying, I need some quick numbers, or how's that thing doing, or how are we looking, and then just open it right up, and that information's right there for you.
And you don't even have to open it up for them. So the nice thing about these dashboards is that there's this either share button, so you can share this if they have Google Analytics, and it will automatically import into their dashboard. But I think more useful is this email tab. So if you click email, you can have it emailed to yourself on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. You can tell it what day of the week you want to get it, and you can say how long you want to get it for, a year, less, etc. So it's a really handy way for you to get this information, kind of pre-screen it for yourself first, and it'll come in a PDF.
Nice.
And then you can forward it on to whomever those stakeholders are, and they have it in a PDF and email, which I think is much, much easier for a layman than asking them to go into the Google Analytics
go
dashboard.
here, log in,
exactly.
do all this other stuff. Yeah, that's nice. All right, so first of all, this has been great. It's a great breakdown of the primary metrics and where to go to find these things. One thing that I've been hearing a lot about lately, though, is universal analytics. And and I think probably some students out there might have heard about it as well. Can you shed some light on that and maybe intro what that is and what it means.
Absolutely. So Universal Analytics, the moniker alone is apt because it's going beyond just the digital realm. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of Universal Analytics is the idea of cross-platform analysis. So we talked about how sessions were counted twice if I visited on my work computer in the morning and then my phone in the evening. Now, with Universal Analytics, the latest version of Google Analytics, they actually can tie that user across those devices and count them as one unique user. So I actually could have been counted as 2 users in that previous example. In Universal Analytics, ideally I would be counted as 1. So it's kind of the holy grail of analytics, is taking people who are going from one platform to mobile. Mobile's really the focus of that part of Universal Analytics. So cross-device and cross-session analysis is a big part of that. The other part, which I mentioned before, was the tying of the offline world to the online. So they have things like custom metrics, dimension widening, and cost data uploads. All those things basically mean you can take data from any system that exists in the world and upload it into Google Analytics and tie it into your analytics data. So now you can start analyzing all kinds of things. And one example that I'll give you from my history with the Golf Channel is that one thing we were able to do with Universal Analytics was tie the number of tee times booked at a particular course from their point of sale equipment that we upload in Google Analytics with separate data from an open source weather repository.
Nice.
So we could see how weather affected our tee time sales for this particular course. So that is probably scraping, the tip of the iceberg. There's so much stuff you can do once you can start measuring anything with the tools here. And all you have to do is find a common metric. And so that Universal Analytics, what it does is it provides what's called a user ID. So it's really focused on the user rather than the session. So Universal Analytics ties that user to anything they do, offline or online. It's pretty remarkable, and I think we're just seeing the first fruits of that. And as in a few years, we're probably all going to be like, oh yeah, I know when I pick up my dog at the daycare and I buy them, doggy shampoo online. I know that people at that time of day are picking up their dogs, so they're more likely to buy shampoo because someone said, "Hey, you need to clean your dog before they come here once in a while because they were a mess." It's just going to be commonplace. That's my hope. So It's powerful what you can do here. Hopefully, been able to give you a sense of some basic information you can glean. There's certainly a lot more information in here, and if you're willing, to go beyond, you can start setting up all kinds of custom reports and things that tie different disparate data sources together and get insights that you are beyond just your website.
But you can't do it if you're not collecting data.
Exactly.
If you haven't put your code on there yet. So get your Google Analytics code into your website, make sure it's on every page, and then you can start collecting this data. And then, like I said, with so much stuff there, if you can't figure it out yet, if you don't have time to analyze it yet, at least you'll have some of that data collected for the time when you can go in, figure things out, figure out where to make changes, where the opportunities are. It's a super powerful platform. So, we've had some questions, I think, and we should kick it over to Chris, who's at the question desk, who's been fielding the questions from our Treehouse students. Chris, we have a 4-day forecast, or we got some questions?
The question desk. I like.
All right, here we go.
I think many of the questions you guys have already answered throughout the course of it. We had a question from Dylan about why Google wants people to have a Google account in order to see the analytics. But it looks like you kind of already covered that with the ability to export things for folks who don't have Google accounts.
And I think one other thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you have a Google account, generally, if you have Gmail, you're logged in all the time. No matter where you go. And so with Universal Analytics, it's easier for them to then track if you're on your mobile and you open an email and you say, okay, cool, I'm going to visit the site, but I'm not going to convert yet. And then when you go home, you're still logged in. You visit it through the email, through that site. That's one of those insights that you can get about maybe conversion rates or platforms and
yeah, I would say that's part of it, and we're not to the point where they're tying everything together like that completely. But yeah, we're at the beginning of that, so it's definitely important, and certainly Google has an interest in being able to share the information from a single user in everything they do, and we get more useful information out of it when we look in the analytics.
Let's see. Brandon asked earlier too about the what is not provided mean in the keyword acquisition panel, but it sounds like that's when someone's actually logged into a Google account now because of privacy, correct?
Correct, that's correct. So Google decided for users to no longer share the keywords they search on in Google with the website owners of the sites they end up on from Google search results. It's extremely controversial still. They did it a couple years ago, but it's still very controversial. And they just recently did the same thing for paid search. So what you used to be able to do was, okay, I can't get the organic search data. I'll go into the paid search keywords if you happen to be running paid search campaign, and you can still get keyword information that would help you and show you what pages they landed on and what they did after they got there. That has been pulled back now recently as well, so you have to go into AdWords to get that. So, you know, but it is a user privacy issue. So certainly pros and cons on both sides. And the bottom line is you can get upset about these things. The fact is privacy is going to become more and more of an issue, and this is how Google's chosen to handle it. And it's just the reality that we're in, so you have to find ways around it.
Right.
Cool. We have a little bit of confusion about universal analytics, the idea of the universal analytics versus what it used to be. Some people are seeing, hey, you should upgrade to universal analytics, and then confused about what that means and why. People are kind of talking it out, but any insight you have into UA would be great.
Yeah, so converting is you have to retag your site. So you have to take that snippet that you put on your site on every page, pull it out, put the new universal analytics on. That's the foundation. You can't track it unless it has the new tracking code. It's a much more robust tracking code that tells you who this person is rather than this browser. So, but the insights would be, I think when you get down into channels that users are coming from, it's much more robust. The other thing you can do with universal analytics right away is you can control what things show in the interface and how they show. So for instance, you will often see in your referring site list the same site, but just in different forms. Or you're going to see keywords that are for, let's say, your brand name or the website's name. A common thing I like to do with universal analytics is go in and tell Google, hey, when someone types in my URL into a search bar and then ends up on my site rather than directly into their browser, it was clearly an accident. They meant to go right to the site. I want to count that as direct instead of search engine traffic or referral, because that can artificially inflate your search engine traffic, because almost any site that has even a modicum of branding and brand awareness will have users who accidentally type the URL into Google rather than the address bar.
And then finally, it's just a tiny bit off topic, but Svetlana asks if there are any services similar to Google Analytics that you know anything about, can recommend. At least we can mention some competitors, I suppose.
Certainly. There's paid competitors like Omniture, no longer Omniture, Adobe Marketing Cloud. And so Adobe Site Catalyst is very common also and quite popular. It's not cheap. It's certainly enterprise level software. It has a little bit more fine-grained control behind the scenes and how the analytics reports look. So what you get with Google is you get their default views, and then you can kind of tweak them. With Omniture, you can have something that's a little bit more customized and maybe a more easy way to upload some of your offline data. So Google, it used to be you would go to Omniture because you had some of this offline sales data or tea time data like we had at the Golf Channel. With Universal Analytics, it's less of an issue, but you still do have a little bit more robust reporting capabilities with something like Adobe Site Catalyst. There's other free ones that will come with web hosting often. There's like Awstats, a generic one called WebStats. Those are okay, but you'll quickly find, and feel free to use them, they're free. They're usually automatically installed on a site you buy through like even shared hosting. You'll often find they just don't have the level of data that Google Analytics has. And Google Analytics is remarkable for the fact that it's giving away enterprise-level software for free. Any of the other tools that are comparable to Google Analytics, like Adobe Site Catalyst, are going to cost money. IBM has one called Core Metrics. That one is also enterprise-grade. I find that one is both Adobe and Core Metrics probably the most have a much deeper learning curve than Google Analytics. So doing one of these overviews of one of those pieces of software would actually probably require more time just to even get the basics. The user interface design Google is very iterative on, and they're very good at figuring out pain points for users and eliminating them. The other tools, even though you pay for them, don't always have as rigorous of a user interface update schedule.
Got it.
Cool.
Good on questions?
That's all the questions we have time for.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we appreciate you guys watching, and thank you for all the questions as well. Once again, Eric Erickson, how can people get in touch with you or find you? You're on Twitter? Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. My handle is Eric. That's ERIK ERIC, because I have a silly name. It's the same name twice. And my email or my Gmail address, I'm happy if you want to contact me at that with other questions that we don't have time for. I'm happy to answer those. It's ET, like the alien, ET Erickson, ERICKSON @gmail.com.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you
really
very
appreciate it. And Google Analytics is absolutely something our students need to know about, and stat packages in general. Thank you once again for watching. We'll be back next week with another live stream. But until next time, Dan Gorgone, Eric Erickson, thank you for watching.